From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. On Thursday, we had an exclusive one-on-one interview with Democratic National Committee Chairman Tom Perez. He tells me he came to Rhode Island at the request of Governor Gina Raimondo to talk about college affordability and to throw his support behind her plan for free college tuition for 2 years. Here now is our interview with Chairman Tom Perez. So, Chairman, thank you for your time. I know you're busy, and
great to be here in Rhode Island.
Welcome back to Rhode Island, right? A Brown University grad.
Absolutely, many good years here. Going to Pawtucket to watch the Paw Sox, and have fondest of memories of my time here.
And of course, we want any dirt you can give on Congressman David Cicilline, one of your former classmates.
We could take the whole interview up with that. I got a file on him. The problem is he has a file on me.
Well, let's start with why you are here. You're here to talk about college affordability. You support Governor Raimondo's free college for 2 years plan. Why? What's your pitch on that?
Education is the great equalizer. That's what my parents taught me. As labor secretary, you look at the data. The more education you have, the better your chances are of punching your ticket to the middle class. And the reality is here in Rhode Island, there's tremendous opportunity. The unemployment rate is now down to its lowest level in years. When I first started as labor secretary, it was the highest in the nation. And Governor Raimondo and so many others have led an effort to make sure we bring it down. But we're not going to make that long-term progress unless we invest in our most precious asset, our people. Because you look at the data, roughly 70% of the jobs that are going to be created in the years to come require more than a high school degree. Not necessarily a four-year degree, but more than a high school degree. And right now there's only about 40% of Rhode Islanders who are working age are prepared for that. And if you're Latino, it's 1 in 5, and if you're African American, it's roughly 3 in 10. And so we have to make sure that everyone in every zip code of this state can have that level playing field. And these investments in educational opportunity, I think, are the right way to go. And I traveled as labor secretary across the country, and this was a nonpartisan issue. You go to Tennessee, Governor Haslam, a Republican, I disagree with him on many things, and I wholeheartedly agreed with the approach that they took in Tennessee. It helped everybody win, for workers, win for communities, win for the middle class, win for employers.
It's not a partisan thing here, actually, except there's inter-party disagreement on this. You might know this already, but the Democratic Speaker of the House has been very skeptical to the plan, and I think that's putting it mildly. He says it's fiscally irresponsible and the benefits are being overplayed. Do you think you can be a good Democrat and oppose this plan, in your view?
Well, I think I appreciate the fact that anytime you're proposing an investment, you need to look at the fiscal impact. So people in the State House are doing their job to examine whether to do this, whether to support this investment. And the question I ask, or the question I would suggest that my friends, Republican, Democrat, Independent in the State House ask, is not simply can we afford to do it, but can we afford not to do it? Look at the population right now. We have a tremendous opportunity to continue to attract businesses here in Rhode Island. And at the same time, we have way too many people here in Rhode Island who aren't equipped for the jobs of tomorrow. That's why I'm so proud to be a Democrat. You know, the Democratic Party has always been about making sure people have equal educational opportunity. It's in the platform of the Democratic Party from the 2016 campaign. It's in the platform of the Rhode Island State Democratic Party. And when you make these investments, what happens? People get better jobs. They're making more money. They're paying more taxes because they're making more money. And so I think it's really important to look at the long-term return on investment for the tax collector, for the state, and for families.
We have to talk about this. You generated a lot of headlines last week when at a rally you said, quote, they don't give an expletive, we are regulated by the FCC, about people. A darn, not quite, a different four-letter word than darn. First of all, who are they? Are you talking about Speaker Ryan and President Donald Trump doesn't give an expletive about people, or the entire Republican Party?
No, I was talking about the Republican leadership, and I was talking about it in the context of two things. The attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which I thought was heartless. I mean, people struggling with opioid addiction are going to suffer if the Affordable Care Act is repealed. People with pre-existing conditions, they're not just Democrats. They're people all over this country. 24 million Americans who got insurance. So the Affordable Care Act's been a lifesaver. And the notion that you want to rip this critical component of middle-class security from people, I think was heartless. And secondly, you look at the budget that Donald Trump just sent to the Congress. They call it a skinny budget. I call it a gutless budget. I call it a budget that is heartless because just here in Rhode Island, if you're a senior relying on low-income energy assistance, cut. If you're someone who is either elderly or disabled and you rely on Meals on Wheels, cut. I mean, if he just went to Mar-a-Lago half the time, we could take that savings and provide support for Meals on Wheels for so many people. I mean, Bobby Kennedy said that, we're a great nation. We're a compassionate nation.
This was probably striking to a lot of people, not just the GOP. It felt like a different tone from the Democratic Party. Michelle Obama had said over and over again last year of Democrats, when they go low, we go high. And to a lot of people, it doesn't sound like you subscribe to that.
I'd love to go high when they go low, and that's a wonderful aspiration. But look at what's happening now. A child gets dropped off at school by their parent, and they literally witness their parent a half a block from school getting stopped by ICE and now being deported. That person who had the coverage on the 1st of March, and I met someone in Nashville, Tennessee. March 1st, he gets his health insurance coverage, and March 15th, he gets his liver transplant. Saved his life. When we see so many people who have benefited, who are now in danger of suffering, the Republican Party, the Republican leadership is ruthless. I mean, they stopped Merrick Garland in his tracks, and then they complain about the Democratic delay tactics. They did something unprecedented. And so while I would love to turn the other cheek, what I love more is I need to make sure that we're fighting for working families.
We'll move on from this last question. You can disagree with their policies. You clearly do. But do you honestly believe the president and the House Speaker don't care about people?
Well, again, budgets are moral documents, Tim. They reflect the values of the body that proposes them. And when you look at what's happening in this country, you look at the abject suffering that family with opioid addiction is going to have to deal with. When you look at that senior relying on that meal for a day, and you look at the fact that we need to do this so that we can give more tax breaks to the wealthy, I just think those priorities are absolutely warped, Tim, and I'm proud to be a Democrat because we're fighting for the common man, the common woman, people who are struggling to make ends meet, making sure they stay in the middle class. That's why we're here talking about Rhode Island's promise. That's why we're here talking about apprenticeship, investments. That's why we're here making sure that we continue to fight for health care coverage. These are the pillars of middle-class security.
Well, let's bring it back to Rhode Island. As you know, Rhode Island is normally reliably Democratic, and the state's electoral votes did go to Hillary Clinton on Election Day. But Donald Trump, he outperformed here, one of the best Republican showings in decades. What do you think happened? Why do you think he was relatively, I guess I could say, popular in Rhode Island?
Well, again, I think your question, the important part of your question is, the Democrats did again score a solid victory in the presidential here.
That's not a headline.
At the same time, I've spoken to folks who voted for Barack Obama twice and then voted for Donald Trump, and they're looking for change. They saw Barack Obama as a change agent, and they see Donald Trump as a change agent who's going to fight for them. And my simple, and I respect that vote. And what we are doing as Democrats is demonstrating the facts, because the change that I'm confident the voters that I speak to who were voting for Donald Trump were seeking is not the change they're getting. I'm going to make your life easier, he said. 3 hours into his administration, he makes it harder for first-time home buyers to buy a home by rescinding an Obama-era initiative to cut the costs, closing costs. A few days later, he initiates a process to make it harder for people to save for retirement. What do both of those things have in common? They help Wall Street at the expense of Main Street. And in fact, when he undertook his initiative to make it harder for people to save for retirement, he said, my friends on Wall Street are having trouble adjusting to the new rule. Well, that doesn't look like the change that people were looking for.
But let's diagnose 16 just a little bit more. Did the Clinton campaign, do you think, and I'm sure you don't want to be critical of the Clinton campaign, but did they talk enough about the values that might be important to the middle class?
Well, I think we talked quite often, not only Secretary Clinton, but others talked a lot about the need to make sure that we have higher ed affordability, as we're talking about today, the need to make sure that we're investing in our workforce, that we're making sure that people can afford health care, all of those pillars of the middle class. What many people heard, though, I mean, in the closing weeks of this campaign, it was hard to penetrate, undeniably, and many voters that we talked to didn't hear that message. And so we have to do a better job, Tim, undeniably, of communicating our values. And part of the reason I'm here today is to communicate our values. We have always been the party of opportunity for everyone, not just the rich. We have been the party of education. We've been the party of health care. In 1964 and 65, when they were debating Medicare, it was the Republican Party who was saying this is gonna lead to socialism in America, and it was the Democratic Party that was saying no, this is going to lead to security for senior citizens. Democrats believe that health care is a right, not a privilege. Republicans believe that health care is a service for those who can afford it, and if you can't, well, tough luck. So our differences couldn't be more stark, and I agree with you. Implicit in your question is, do Democrats have to do a better job of communicating our values? Absolutely, and that's why we're out here listening and learning and telling people what we stand for, and telling people not just what Donald Trump said, but the differences between what he said and what he's doing.
Political analysis from the chairman of the DNC comes with some weight. So I want to ask you this about Governor Gina Raimondo. The New York Times reported that Governor Raimondo is, quote, seen as a potential presidential candidate in 2020. Do you agree with that?
Well, listen, the American people will decide who all the presidential candidates are.
Where is she on the national stage?
I will say this. I got to know Governor Raimondo literally from the time of her election, and I mentioned earlier, Tim, that my first conversations occurred when she was governor-elect, and they were all about building a Rhode Island that works for everyone. And I think she's done a tremendous job here in Rhode Island, and I think a lot of what she is doing is a model for the nation, whether it's investing in education, whether it's the computer science courses for people. I think she has been a governor for everyone, and I think she's a star. And I'm proud to call her a friend, and I'm hoping she is out there talking in other states about how Democrats can lead with their values and win, because we've lost a few seats in governor's races, and one of my top priorities is to make sure we turn that around. I think we can, and I think she's a remarkable role model, not just for women, but for everyone in this state and around America.
Well,
and
if she does have those,
her leadership.
If she does have those ambitions, it doesn't hurt to have a friend at the DNC, I'm sure. Let's talk about Massachusetts. Our market covers Massachusetts as well. You know a thing or two about Massachusetts politics, having worked for the late Senator Kennedy. Big election 2018 there for governor. Polls show Republican Governor Charlie Baker is extremely popular, one of the most popular in the country. He's seen as a moderate. Some political analysts have suggested it's a long shot for Democrats to try and beat him next year. Do you think Democrats should give Baker a pass in 2018?
Heck no. And we're going to be fielding candidates up and down the ballots in Massachusetts and Maryland and in every state, because I think when we communicate our values and put those values into action, I am confident we can move forward. I'll tell you just an example from my own state of Maryland. When I was in 2006, I was a local elected official in Maryland, and a guy named Martin O'Malley decided to run for governor. Bob Ehrlich's approval ratings when Martin O'Malley got in the race were north of 60%. Very popular incumbent. And at the end of that campaign, Bob Ehrlich was the ex-governor of Maryland. And so when Democrats get out there and they lead with their values and they demonstrate the differences and they're taking on Donald Trump in clear, conspicuous ways, showing what needs to be done, I think Democrats can do well everywhere. And I'll tell you, the energy I see across this country, Tim, is unlike anything I've seen in my lifetime. And I spoke to someone a generation older than me, and I asked him recently, have you ever seen anything like this? And he said, not since Freedom Summer. So, and when Donald Trump continues to try to take people's health care away, continues to divide our nation, continues to hurt our nation economically, people are noting that, and Republicans everywhere, in red states, in blue states, in states where they appear popular, we're playing ball in every single state because I think our values are the values of the majority of the American people.
That was DNC Chairman Tom Perez in an exclusive one-on-one interview here on Newsmakers. Joining me for the rest of the program, of course, from WPRI.com is reporter Ted Nesi. And our guest here on the second half for the rebuttal, I suppose, is State GOP Party Chairman Brandon Bell. Chairman, good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me again.
All right, so earlier in the interview with Chairman Perez, I asked him about those caustic remarks he made about the president, about the House Speaker last week. He said, that they didn't give an expletive about people. They didn't care about people. Chairman, the state GOP has demanded that he apologize. One might think that's ironic considering the comments made by Donald Trump.
Well, I'm not sure which comments, whether they were tweets or fireside tweets or what he was.
You want them alphabetical or chronological?
Doesn't make a difference, really.
Right.
But look, on behalf of the Rhode Island Republican Party, I don't give a bleep what Tom Perez says, to be honest with you. What he said basically was an echo of what Hillary Clinton said about the irredeemable and deplorables. And he insulted people that were providing him security yesterday. He insulted the Republicans all across the spectrum. And so, for him now to say, well, it's about the leadership and it's about Trump and Ryan and they don't really care, he's just trying to throw bombs, flame throw. I took notes in some of that interview, and boy, Tim, you got some good stuff.
Well, all right, but fine. And I don't mean to do the, he started it kind of question, but here's that question. Isn't Perez just playing into the world that Donald Trump has really, I don't want to say created, but has pushed forward into the mainstay?
I would say the answer to that is no, because or maybe in his mind he is, in this idea that, when they go low, we go high, and whatever the way that all goes. So what now? He's got to play to that element. I mean, this is called I believe he's called it the turnaround tour. It looks to me like the down and out tour, particularly if he's coming to Rhode Island. What's he doing here? They have a supermajority in the legislature. They have the governor's office. One might suggest because she's so darn unpopular that they can't afford to lose the seat, at 41% or whatever the vote that she got, and that she's struggling with some of these programs that she's put out and all the hundreds of millions of dollars she's spending to try to get us jobs. I'm wondering what he's doing here.
She, of course, being Governor Gina Raimondo.
Yes.
He had an interesting remark there. He referenced that the governor of Tennessee has put in something like the governor's tuition program. I think it's 2 free years of community college, if I understand it right. Though I don't. Well, PolitiFact's gone, luckily, so I'll be okay. He said, "I'd ask my Republican friends, can we afford not to do this?" What do you say to that as the debate continues about this providing 2 years of tuition?
I'm willing to bet, although thankfully, PolitiFact is gone. I'm willing to bet that Tennessee's economy is a heck of a lot better than our economy, probably due in part to having a Republican governor and a Republican legislature. Having said that, look, does he understand that we're number 50? I think we're number 51 out of 50. I don't even think we're 50 anymore. And it's number 50 by CNBC, guys. This is not Fox News that's putting us at number 50 in the worst business climate. Does he understand what he's talking about when he's talking about the context about what we have in Rhode Island. Socialist ideas don't work here. People might like the idea of free.
So
things.
you don't see educating the people of Rhode Island as a boost to turn around that economy. Educate the people to get them the jobs that would get Rhode Island out of 50. You don't buy into that at all.
It's not that I don't buy into it at all. I agree with the concept of providing easier access to education. I don't agree with the concept of using kids as props to campaign and going to schools and doing what she's doing to try to get there. But I also believe that this is not a chicken and the egg situation. Our economy stinks because we're not more like Massachusetts. 30 years ago, Massachusetts was Taxachusetts. Now they're like the miracle. They've got, a lower sales tax. We all live within 15 minutes of Massachusetts. I live 1 mile from Massachusetts when I live up in Cumberland. The schools are better. The taxes are better. The regulations are better. I practice law up in Boston. I was going to federal court the other day in the Seaport District in Boston, and I got a little disoriented because there were 3 more buildings from the last time I was there. I mean, they're doing things that are right. Why can't we look at what they're doing and try to,
All right, so I want to ask you about some politics while we still have time on the show. So, governor's race, as you already alluded to, and presumably part of why Tom Perez is here, as you said, everyone thinks Alan Fung might go forward again. Mayor Cranston, who was last time, Joe Trillo this week told Catherine Gregg at the Journal he's going to form an exploratory committee. Gio Ferrocci, the businessman, has flirted with it. How many other serious candidates have talked to you that you think are going to throw their hat in the ring?
You've named the main ones that I've heard from. There might be others. I think it's an exciting time. I would think if Mayor Fung chooses to get in, he'd have a big advantage with his name ID and with what he's done with Cranston and turning around Cranston. So I'm excited about the prospects. I mean, that's where we're looking at that race. We're looking at the U.S. Senate race. We're looking at the legislative races, obviously. In a non-presidential year, we always do better. And so I think this year our goals are going to be pretty ambitious to try to get to a third of the legislature turning Republican.
Back to Ted's question about the gubernatorial race. What's the timeline on that? I mean, we're in 17. It's a 2018 race. Got to start fundraising. At what point does that race for the Republicans need to solidify, where a candidate has to kind of move forward, or candidates?
Yeah, I mean, I think that really depends on their fundraising ability. It's tough to raise money as a Republican candidate in Rhode Island. It always has been. Mayor Fung did a great job in 2013 and 14 in raising money. So, I suppose if you're comparing and contrasting, you might say that he might be able to get in a little later because he would have a little bit more of an ability to fundraise off of his
Should he tap into public funding again?
I think that he should take a long, hard look at that. I'm not so sure that having been mayor for as long as he's been mayor that he's got the ability to self-fund. So that's probably something he needs to look at, and it's, again, something I haven't talked to him about. But again, I'm excited about the fact that there's so much interest. And Joe Trillo coming out this week. Joe was 16 years up in the legislature at the State House. So Gio Ferrocci. And there might be others. So
you mentioned the U.S. Senate race as well. That's gotten kind of interesting. Rep. Nardolillo, Bobby Nardolillo of Coventry, has made clear for a while he's going to announce next month in May. Now Robert Flanders, former Supreme Court Justice, has gotten in. I know both of them have spoken to you. Do you think they're going to end up in a primary, or do you think one of them is going to either decide to get out or get pushed out by party leaders?
Right now I have no idea what's going to happen in, with regard to that race. I think they're both qualified. I have a lot of experience with Bobby Nardolillo in the last 2 years with him working at the State House and trying to work together with our House caucus, as small or as large as it has been. And then I also have a lot of experience with Judge Flanders as a practitioner, practicing before him in the Supreme Court. I have a lot of respect for both of those gentlemen. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, primaries, I agree with Steve Frias. Primaries are not a great thing for us. We'd like to try to avoid that. And to the extent that, at some point in time, maybe it's a money race, we'll see what happens. But I'm glad to see both of them going after.
As chairman, do you play a role in that? Because, as you say, you probably want to avoid a primary for money reasons. At some point, would you step forward and talk to one of the candidates and say, hey, maybe you should consider running for a different office or backing out altogether. Do you view that as your role?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of my role, certainly, besides spokesperson, messenger, and everything else under the sun, fundraising, getting our message out there effectively, is to have some bit of say in how these things go, but it's up to the party. And we do have open primaries, and so if it comes down to that, I mean, I might step in, but it would be privately, and try to convince someone to step aside. But my say is just an opinion. I don't have any real authority under our bylaws.
Your own name has come up as a candidate, potentially for Attorney General, which will be an open seat.
Really?
Because Peter, yes, I think I can't imagine who told me that you might think about that. So what's your thinking right now on whether to run for AG, and when would you decide on whether to be a candidate?
I think my wife would have some say in that, clearly before anything else.
Everyone says that on the
Yeah,
show.
they do.
Have
They
you
do.
noticed that?
Yeah.
Well,
We both
There's
too
no
many men.
true campaign managers.
Well, he's going to be married soon, so I have to warn him about some of the pitfalls.
God bless you.
So so it's something that I would not say absolutely not, never say never kind of attitude about that. And I think I'm qualified. I'll give myself a little shout out. And so we'll see what happens. I think it would be a little ways off, and then fundraising and how that would all sort of.
What
come
about the
together.
other prosecutor in the state, U.S. Attorney? That is obviously not an elected position.
Yeah.
Where does that stand in terms of getting names together to present to the president?
So far, the White House has reached out. We've had some communications. They reached out shortly after the inauguration, and then since then I've talked to the White House several times. White House one of the assistant counsels there, and so they basically have told me the RNC members will have say, and it's a slow process right now. This week, of course, is Gorsuch, who will be Supreme Court Justice by noon, hopefully, and then after that, they'll have to work on the circuit courts. I don't think Rhode Island is high on the priority list. That's my speculation, but it's a pretty educated guess in that. We're not in an emergency situation. The U.S. Attorney's Office is functioning very well. It always has when we've had acting
Very
U.S.
quickly, 'cause we
attorneys.
only have 30 seconds
Sure.
left. Are you already sending names down to them? Or are you still at the, how will we send names?
We're at that process at this point in time. I've gathered some names and I've talked to people, and we're at that
Will you put
point
your
in
own
time.
name on the list?
Never know. Never know. I might just, it's kind of like today where you let me give me a self-promotion here. You never know. But one thing that Tom Perez said about Gina for 2020,
15
and I
seconds.
was thinking about this just for a second, is that I don't even think she has 2020 vision. So I'm not sure how she's going to do as president in 2020.
You benefit by the end of the
Yeah,
show.
all right.
Chairman Brandon Bell, thanks for joining us. Tom Perez, DNC chairman, was on the first half. If you missed it, it's on WPRI.com. Ted and I will see you next week on Newsmakers.